very lucky to work there with some fantastic colleagues. Great working environment. But I've been living in Stockholm for 30 years. I was recently asked by my colleagues there why I came to Stockholm. I went for a 3-week holiday in 1994 to visit some friends I studied with in Ireland in university. It was for 3 weeks. And still there. So I divide my time between Stockholm and Oslo. Probably know from my name, O Sullivan. I'm actually Irish. I come from Cork City in Ireland. And growing up, I was, must give a lot of credit to my late father, who somehow gave me a love for music, art, and sport, which is why one of my favorite quotes is up there by William Butler Yeats, the Irish poem, "How can we know the dancer from the dance?" And I actually use this in my skill acquisition classes in Norway, asking the students at the start of the year, how can we know the dancer from the dance? And as we go through the year, to see if their worldview, you could say, or perspective changes. So it's a very interesting exercise combining art. So, but I know we're going to be speaking about early professionalism, but I'm going to add a little twist to it. So as I said, the thing is that my journey into academia has been a bit non-linear, one could say. I don't know how many of you who work in academia here took the path I took, but I actually used to work as a DJ, a music producer. I ran record labels, the normal stuff associate professors used to do. So these are all the artist names I released on, been in Tokyo playing. I don't know if anyone here, what they know about house and techno, but we all have this in Berlin. There's this incredibly hip club called Berghain. I played there 2005. So it was a fantastic journey and wonderful. And I'm still slightly involved in music, but my main thing is I found that while even doing music or anything I do, I'm really so fascinated with learning. I'm just totally fascinated with it. And I started coaching a football team in Stockholm through a friend of mine who was the head coach. Would I be assistant coach? This is around 2001, 2002 or something. And he left after a month. He left me with a load of 16-year-olds, and I'm going, okay, what do I do? So I started going on these courses, and I was like, this doesn't feel right. Because I was actually recalling how my father spoke to me about football and sport when I was younger. And something was not registering with me. And I had great difficulty in articulating my ideas and how my feelings and my thoughts and what I'd learned from my father. So I wrote to loads of academics, about 20 of them. Every single one of them answered. And every single one of them offered me my time. And one of them, Keith Davids, became my handleder, veiledare, supervisor for my PhD. So it's a wonderful journey. I literally fell backwards into academia, and it's been fantastic. It's been wonderful. So every day is a learning day, and I'm incredibly lucky to be working with such brilliant students that work with everything from Olympic to professional to grassroots, and I learn every day from them in many different sports. My main sport is football, so a lot of stuff that I'll be presenting will be around football, but it applies to a lot of other sports. Okay? Bit of inspiration. You know who this guy is? Yeah, Stephen Hawking. So what I think is fantastic about this is that he had the biggest selling scientific book of all time, A Brief History of Time. And I think it was a few years before he died, he sent a message to his collaborator, Herzog, and said, I've been looking at things from the wrong perspective. I want to rewrite the book. It's not that he was wrong. He was just his perspective, he felt he wanted. And this is really important. From a mechanistic worldview to embracing and navigating complexity. The idea that he said that we see the universe as a machine governed by unconditional laws and prior existence, but replace it with a view the universe as a self-organizing entity with all sorts of emergent patterns. So this idea of mechanistic worldview, etc., will come up a few times during this. And I think this is a fantastic thing for me. I really hope that. I was actually recently in the in Czechia, in Prague, and I was doing teaching on their pro license course, And there was a man there, and he was in his mid-70s. Doesn't coach anymore. Has been a top coach at the highest level. And I spoke with him after, and I said, so why do you come to these events? I just love learning. 75. Fantastic. What an inspiration. Example of a complex system. This complexity is very centered to my talk as well. You know what this is? It's not a swimmer. It's a murmur of starlings. I think this is a wonderful example of a complex system in action. And I just give you this quote as a bit of inspiration. I love this. Study the science of art, study the art of science, develop your senses, especially learn how to see. When we say learn how to see, observe. Very important message for coaches. Observe. Realize that everything connects to everything else. So, let's go. My talk is mainly going to be around this. Sport is for children, not the other way around. Children are not for sport. So I'm going to ask, where are we now? And where can we go? And I know my understanding is a lot of policy makers and people working in different organizations here. I think a real take home for you people is that, because you all work with developing and creating systems for youth sport especially, systems don't rise to the level of their goals. They fall to the level of their design. And I think that's a real essential take home for anyone working within a sports organization, developing systems. So, as we said, the title is Early Professionalization. But I'm going to argue, and I'm going to theorize around the ideas of where are we now and where can we go, and I'm going to use examples from real-world examples from a professional sport as well. But I don't think it's early professionalism. I think it's the illusion of professionalism. That's what I think it is. I think this is an illusion. So we have really happening in our society across domains at the moment, in schools and in sport, this idea of this race to the bottom. We call it my good friend Christian Bjørndal, who gave a talk here last year, he refers to this as the early learning boost. So we see this happening coming into schools and sports. So if you look here, there's this schools now, particularly across Scandinavia, are becoming dominated by a very rationalistic logic of management and control. And there's this hijacking of play, and I'm starting to see this with my own kids as they were going through school, is that play was being used in a way for learning. So to start early, so not to lose time, to be more efficient for future purposes. And this idea it's almost like some sort of neoliberal ideology already starting. Play is play. It's nothing else. That's it. The purpose of play is play. But it's been hijacked at the moment in schools, particularly, for the idea of the early learning boost. And then in our educational rankings, we have global competitiveness, PISA scores, and this is in some way pushing down earlier and earlier. Where the reading or the math in our country doesn't look good according to the PISA scores. But so we have to get earlier and earlier and start the kids earlier and earlier. So this is a real race to the bottom. And at the center of this is a standardization of knowledge. Now this is happening not only in schools, it's happening in coach education as well, where we're viewing children to the lens of economic value for future investments. There's pressure to perform and comply. So already in schools, we're looking at them through the lens of economic value. And through this, we're building, despite the fact, standardizing knowledge, and also building a very narrow focus of knowledge. And I will get to this later. So if we go into sport, you see that there's a market logic very central now to sport, particularly in Sweden. I'm really, really seeing this. Children are compared at an early age. Again, the early learning boost, to be more efficient, not lose time. And this is a quote here I'm using from my colleague Bastian Rijmersje from the Dutch FA. He says, this is the first time we're placing economic value on children since the 19th century. And also we're seeing a lot of outsourcing to private enterprises in child youth sport. Very questionable technologies. There are now skill app techniques around Europe and particularly Scandinavia being used as player development plans for coaching and coach education in clubs. So you give the coaches this skill apps with loads of predetermined training sessions, pre-designed, what they're supposed to do. This is really starting to spread, particularly across the Nordic countries now. And I'm seeing it from colleagues in the USA are telling me the exact same thing, even in the UK as well. And the idea of and we're also, there's a lot of copy pasting going on, copy pasting of best practice. And I'll get to that as well later. So one part of my PhD, one of the real things I argued in my PhD is that athlete development frameworks should evolve in interaction with the socio-cultural context. There is no copy-paste. Particularly in football, I don't know, we have the World Cup coming up, so I'm sure some country that nobody expected will do well, and we'll be all looking at their player development plan and trying to copy and paste it. But it'll probably be just the same. Someone will write a book and they'll just probably change the cover of the last book from the last World Cup and just put on a new country's name, and there we go. I don't know, maybe we have, I don't know, whatever country it is. So there's a lot of copy-paste without any respect or sensitivity to the cultural context. You know, what works in Barcelona or Croatia may not work in Stockholm, Oslo, Reykjavik, or Beijing because of the specific socio-cultural context. And there's a lot of evidence that youth football, particularly youth football and youth sport, is becoming more professionalized and commercialized. Now, this really first struck me about 8 years ago. I was sitting, or 7 years ago, I was sitting at a conference in the south of Sweden, and I met somebody from one of the football associations, and I asked them what they thought of how football in Stockholm is, and they were saying, oh yeah, it's more professionalized. I was like, really? Okay, what do you mean? Yeah, it's way more organized, better structures, better vision documents, more very strategically operating organizations now. And I said, what's that got to do with children's football? What's happening on the pitch? What's happening out on the pitches? How are the coaches working with the children? What environments are we creating? And he actually didn't really understand what I was on about. It was more about, we're professional because we have strategy. We have a clear organization. We have structures. We have everything that particularly look good on paper, maybe everything that we can measure. So I call this the illusion of professionalism. And at the center of all this is a big administrative apparatus. The tail is now wagging the dog. So I'm going to read a lot of these roles that are created within these organizations. They give the appearance of a structured professional operation. Structured, professional. Yet many exist primarily to perpetuate the system, not because they are truly essential. Systems fall to the level of their design. Let's zoom out a bit. This is a research paper I did called There's No Copy-Paste. I based it on a lot of the research. I collected 4.5 years of data in Sweden, Scandinavia, and in football around the world regarding coaching, coach education, practices, etc., player development. But I like to look at it through the lens. I don't know if any of you knows, this is Juan Moililo. He was Pep Guardiola's mentor many years ago. He's also worked as his assistant at Man City for many years. So he wrote a lovely piece in the Athletic in the last World Cup after the group stages. And he was asked to write an analysis, and he said that basically he spoke about all I'm seeing is these back to this mechanistic worldview again, this machine-like behaviors. It's all about the coach. There's so many predetermined patterns going on, and the players are really under pressure to conform and comply. And he said that if Cameroon and Brazil changed shirts at half time, the only way I would notice which player and who was because of the tattoos, because they all played exactly the same. He said it was really boring. And this is like, there's a lot of, everyone's preparing to play structured rather than to adapt to the unstructured. So you have these very much top-down game models. And in my research, I was seeing this already with children at 8, 9, 10. This sort of top-down game model where there was these predetermined passing patterns where goalkeeper passes the right back, then you pass it in this way and this way. And they were rehearsing these and regurgitating during the game. And of course, this looked fantastic. But not one of those decisions was owned by any of those children. They were learning a model of the game, not the game. This is later on in many years, problems then occur, limiting their opportunities to perceive information and make decisions. One way also spoke about the globalization, homogenization of standardization of methodologies. I referred to it as methodological imperialism, this very much one-size-fits-all type of methodologies that has been adapted and through some governing bodies forced on different countries. And this is really, and as he said himself, and this is a quote from him, a coaching session in Norway would look very much like a coaching session in South Africa, characterized by two-touch. Everyone's playing with two-touch. So this is very interesting. And I think this is also something we're seeing this homogenization and standardization. Again, it's almost as if there's a neoliberal ideology seeping into coaching and coaching education and how we structure and plan, etc. And then, of course, there was the copy-paste, which is copy-paste of best practice. All this best practice, benchmarking. Someone's best practice is someone else's past practice. Benchmarking, another one we hear. Do you know where the words best practice and benchmarking first appeared? It was in a document in the 70s by a company called Xerox. What do Xerox make? Copy-paste machines, perfect. But the wonderful thing about Juan Malelo, this is what I really respect him for, and this is like the Stephen Hawkins, is that he feels like a regretful father. Because if there was one person I would really want to question now, it would be me 25 years ago. Because a lot of these methodologies are ones he introduced. He's very much the godfather of a lot of this. And the father, he says, I'm like a regretful father. So here we have standardization and homogenization of methods and methodologies. We're actually prioritizing methodology, what, over pedagogy? Who, where, when, why, how. Many system blind spots. We only measure what we can measure. We have these tendencies. Just so you know, up on the top there is I have I recently have an article coming out in March together with Keith Davids and Matthias Mana. Matthias Mana is actually the head analyst for the Argentinian national team. He's been there for about 8 years. And we're writing, and very much this is a central measure, that in performance analysis, we're often only measuring what we can measure. So if anyone wants a copy of this, just get it in my emails to start, get in touch, and I'll just send it on to you. It was fascinating to work with Matthias Mana. And I just want to give you a quote from him, is that everyone's into this performance analysis. We need analysis. We need numbers. We need data. There's no context in data. We need to really consider the context, the culture, etc. This needs to be considered when we're doing performance analysis. So he said that in our culture in Argentina, it's better to have a barbecue than 20 performance analysis sessions with the players. Far better for us in our culture. But if you want to copy that, so we have tendencies to only measure what we can measure. So here's an example, and this is from Sweden actually, where a governing organization was celebrating something. And they said, and you've probably might hear this in Iceland as well, X% of players selected before a certain age are signed for professional clubs. Y% of academy players have represented national youth teams. Brilliant. And the thing is that this becomes a currency of credibility for many organizations. Also, it confuses correlation with causation because it just affirms the system's design. Systems fall to the level of their design. These numbers, data, statistics, what do you want to call them, play very little. They don't account the context behind these, which is basically, let's go back to the race to the bottom. Standardized, homogenized system. A system where survivors are treated as the proof that system works. Get some eggs, put some eggs in a bag, throw the bag at the wall, take out the egg that doesn't break, the system works. Talent is the graveyard of evidence. Nobody sees the dead bodies. At the center of this is a dominant worldview. And I have it here. And often passing unnoticed as simply just the way things are. So within all this, always speaking, there's a dominant worldview. And we're going to get into this now. What shapes your worldview? In fact, a lot of the work and research I've been doing, there's a lot of culturally resilient beliefs shape why we think the way we think and why we do what we do. So I'm going to base it on this. My friend Martin Wilk and I he's the head of methodology at Slavia Prague. We did an article for the Czech Olympic magazine about challenging culturally resilient beliefs. So I like this with Adam Peaty here at the side. No child should need to wake up at 4 a.m. for swimming. Working in Norway, I work with swimming coaches who are told that they have young kids, 10, 11, 12, swimming 9 times a week. Why? Because we can measure it. It's easy to measure. Everyone does it. But nobody considers all the injuries and the mass dropouts on the way. All you need is one survivor to justify the system. One of my students she's a professional swimming coach, now a master's student, highly talented young girl. Her group have dropped at 13 and 14 to swimming 5 times a week. She wants to go lower, but there's parental expectations and pressure. 2 years into this, comparing 5 times a week with 9 times a week, there is no difference in the timings and the winnings and the competition performances than the rest of Norway. Absolutely none. Why? Because her athletes, if you want to call them, they're 14, 15, 13, 14, 15, they get to rest. They have a social life. They get to do other stuff. Whereas if you're 9 times a week, you're probably robbing children of a lot of part of their childhood. The expectation. It doesn't really make any sense. And this is what's great about Adam Peaty. He's a gold medalist. He argues about this. So the evidence suggests that coaches' assumptions and beliefs about learning influence their practice design and pedagogical approach. I'm going to read this. Methods lacking in evidence about how young people best learn and develop their skills are being promoted as truths. Many parents, coaches, have bought into these culturally resilient beliefs and unnecessary generalizations. Indeed, it is the illusion of scientific credibility and validity, often created by sports policymakers, that provide a degree of authority to some dubious ideas evident in talent development structures. And again, so what are assumptions in culturally resilient beliefs? Maybe we need to consider some. So I've done this with governing organizations, and I've asked them, here we have learning styles, number 1. Some kids learn, or young people learn visually, some are orally, some are kinesthetic. DISC personality tests, the 10,000 hours of practice to be an expert, the golden age between 7 to 12. You need to learn a specific skill or technique, or it's too late after that. And then you have the cognitive training away, the brain training away from the actual sport. Now, I've done this with governing organizations around, in general. I've done it in Canada, I've done it in Ireland, I've done it in the UK, Norway, Sweden, I did it in Czech last week. And what's really interesting is that I would say on average, most people think at least 3 of these are science. The fact is, they're all myths. Every single one of them. However, I recently did, and I'll say this clearly, like I know, like anybody who works in sport, I know how that, like, so I did some education thing through FIFA, where where I connected to my job. Learning styles, 10,000 hours, and the golden age for learning were all on the FIFA coach education. It's like, for me, this lacks complete credibility, but it's just accepted as the norm. These culturally resilient beliefs live and live and live on. This personality test was the Myers-Briggs started by a mother and a daughter, completely made up. 10,000 hours came from just a book, Malcolm Gladwell's book, where he spoke about 10,000 hours to become an expert, based on Anders Ericsson's work in deliberate practice. Anders Ericsson wrote a reply saying why journalists should never be allowed to report on science. Malcolm Gladwell has since admitted this is a myth. Sorry, the very rich Malcolm Gladwell has... So, even this, there's no supporting evidence for far transfer of perceptual or cognitive training to sports performance. There's no evidence, none. A lot of products with a lot of science-y evidence, but there's no evidence. This idea of, we're working on an article we're about to submit called What Scanning Is Not. Very hot topic in football now, again. And you turn up at these skill centres, again, back to the outsourcing. There's a load of them around in Sweden at the moment. And kids are, oh, we're going to work with fast decision making. So a ball comes, a light flashes, and they pass. They're making decisions based on lights. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I have no idea when that happens in a football game. You know, flashing lights. Again, the illusion of professionalism. It looks good. Easy to buy into. Probably impresses a lot of parents. Look professional. You probably have some coach standing there telling them what to do and telling them how great they are. But they really become very good at making decisions on flashing lights. That's what they've become really good at. Then we have these two. And look, and this thing, we're back to the early learning boost. These two, excuse me, culturally resilient beliefs have really shaped the idea of the early learning boost and the race to the bottom. You got to get the 10,000 hours in. So you have to start early with a coach. Oh, between 7 and 12, you must learn these skills and techniques or it's too late. Again, get them in early. Get starting early. And there's real problems there because we tend to then look at children through a different lens. And often we're doing a lot of early selection at these age, which is mainly often based on early maturation. You know, there can be in children, there can be 3-4 years difference biologically in one group. We know this. And this reinforcement of bad practices where the emphasis on this mechanical technique, again, the word mechanistic, mechanical technique, and this mechanistic worldview, there is a right way to carry out a technique. There isn't. Funnily enough, we're all different. Different individual constraints. There is no perfect technique. But this is a long assumption that we use in sport. And we're sacrificing this for helping children develop their perceptual cognitive abilities to work and explore and learn from the information in front of them. Again, promoting the idea of automaticity. We're not automata, we're not robots, we're not machines. So, we have to ask that question, the early learning boost. Does more mean better? I mean, if it really was just about more, it would be the easiest thing to do. And before anyone, I always get asked, oh, but Mark, the best players, and this is usually from somebody who's works in this area, the best players, they start early and they train a lot. But let me tell you, the worst players, and the players that got nowhere, no one's ever heard of, also train a lot and also started early. Okay, so don't cause causality again. Challenge culturally resilient beliefs. Be very aware of them. Consider your own worldviews. What are the resilient beliefs that are central to how you perceive the world and how you work with your sport and your assumptions around how young people and young children learn? So where can we go? Wouldn't be right if I couldn't figure out ideas of where we can go. So we need to challenge tendencies towards standardization, homogenization, and reevaluate diversity. We need to invest. Remember going back to the story of the NGB person in Sweden that said, yeah, we're more structured, we're this, we've got more professional through structure and whatever it was all very much administrative structure. It was all, looks good on paper. And this is where the investment is going. We need to invest in the changing context, situations, and constraints of the real world in which coaching, learning, and performance take place. That's where we need to invest. Because sport is for children. Children are not for sport. As long as we are on the other side where we're just only organizing structures, getting all these nice documents together, investing here and here, then children are just for sport. Where can we go? One of the, I have a book chapter coming out in this, and my argument is, where can we go? We need to bring agency back to the table. Basically, agency is making sense of the world and realizing your ability to change it. There's some work by Scott Kelso about how agency and even intentionality appear very early in children. So this is, any of you who are parents, you've probably noticed this, seen these things. Child hits and the noise this, if you want to call it, toy or rattler makes, is the actual world responding back. And that's agency. And the child responds back to that. Now, an important point here is, and I'll read this, is that we need to bring agency back to the table. It is a fundamental characteristic that makes human beings capable of acting intentionally and meaningfully in the world. This is far more challenging than delivering prescribed experiences, such as mythical perfect technique, copy-paste best practice templates. Agency inherently involves exploration, experimentation, and the freedom to make decisions. But this does not imply that young players are free to do what they want. Rather, they are given the opportunity to become protagonists of their own learning. So we need to bring agency back. This is an important one. We need to broaden our ways of knowing. Now, I'm going to explain this because this is based on the work of ecological psychologist James Gibson. It's not just about knowing more. It's also about knowing better. Not just to know more, but to know better. So, according to Gibson, there's complementary sources of knowledge. There's knowledge about, which is second-hand knowledge. Very much knowledge you will get here. Knowledge you will get on a coach education course. Game model, maybe a tactical whiteboard. And this is often, it's second-hand knowledge and often imparted through education, so like coach education. And there is knowledge of. Knowledge of the environment, it's acquired through direct perception. It's keeping in touch with the world, active engagement with one's surroundings. It's more a contextual and situation dependent. And we argue, myself and Christian Birrell argue in a recent paper, that this type of knowledge is extremely relevant for organizing behavior rather than just describing it. So if you want to say, like with young people, if it's football, it's not knowledge about, second-hand knowledge from the coach, it's them exploring to their knowledge of in the game, in the sport they are, where they're given the opportunity to. The problem is that just like Juan Molallo argues, says, we are so heavily weighted in coaching and coach education, and even more so in coach education in the last years, to knowledge about. How are we supporting players and young athletes develop their knowledge of in the sport? Because we as coaches cannot perceive what they perceive. And also, your perception is very connected to your action capabilities, what you're capable of doing and what the culture allows for you to do. So if you're in a, and I'm going to show at the end a very simple example of this in action. Exactly, knowledge about and knowledge of. But I think these two distinct, for me, the work of James Gibson has been highly influential in me in coaching. We need to find a balance. Knowledge about is useful and knowledge of. We need to balance these. But also, and here's an example. So this is, you know this guy, Scaloni, Argentinian captain, Argentinian head coach, manager. He says, my children play in Spain and are overwhelmed with information. They receive the ball and they're being told what to do. This is an interview last year in Marca magazine with him, where he speaks about youth football. He's speaking a lot at the moment, him and Pablo Amar, about problems of overcoaching and the focus of knowledge about in youth football, limiting players, young players, to develop their knowledge of, narrowing their perception. So overwhelming children with knowledge about the game can limit opportunities for to grow knowledge of in the game. Remember when I spoke earlier about the game, a kind of a game model being pushed down early and early with 8 and 9-year-olds, predetermined passing patterns rehearsed in training and then regurgitated in a match, and it looks wonderful and it looks fantastic and it looks professional. But this is just knowledge about. They're not developing their knowledge of. And we have a lot of evidence in our work that we've been doing, myself and James Vaughan, evidence of players that have gone through this where they are not playing the information. So one of them was, one of the interviews, a coach said that, yeah, all my players are in the right position according to the game model, but we keep losing the ball. He couldn't figure out why they were losing the ball. But the game model, again, forcing knowledge about in players, limiting their ability to act on information in the game to develop their and grow their knowledge of. Coaching, coach education. Okay, I've made a mistake there. that shouldn't be in there, but so just ignore the quote there in the middle. That's on the next slide. So just a very simple, for our students, we want our students to learn to coach. Academic work that we do with them at NIH, where they will read articles, research articles, theoretical work, discussions, etc. And then that's learn to coach, and they go out and coach learn. Applying this in practice, growing their knowledge of the environment where they are. In the third year, my students often have to also write a contextual historical analysis. Last year, I had 2 people in a swimming club, very near each other, 2 different coaches. I can tell you, they had, despite being in the same city, despite being about 5 kilometers from each other, they had very little in common in the culture. So maybe a coach to develop their knowledge of one environment doesn't mean they can just take all what they did and just dump it here, because it's a different culture and it's a different context, even within the same city. So we encourage our students to learn to coach, knowledge about, and coach to learn, develop their knowledge of. Dig where you stand. And then a central argument here is that, this is the first question I asked. How many of you have been on coach education courses? Have you ever been asked this question? No? Have you? Yeah. Damn, there's always one. But you're Irish, you're forgiven.
I was asked what's the difference between technique and skill.
Okay, yeah.
So not quite the same.
What is skill? I know what you mean, I know. That's a common one. What is skill? Fantastic question. Asked this again at the start of my skill acquisition classes. Typically, let's just say that skill for much of the 20th century is being very dominated by stage and step learning, very linear. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And this is sequential, very internal and cognitive. And the whole idea that, yeah, if the child learns the technique, it frees space somehow in the brain, this mysterious space in the brain, for them to do other stuff and look at the tactics and the other information. So this is a very linear approach. And then this has really shaped what's called information processing, the idea, where motor skills are stored and retrieved. It's a very computer metaphor. Motor skills are stored and retrieved from the brain, that there's optimal movement, there's the correct techniques. Variability is often looked at as error, and it's very linear sequential process where you have first you perceive, then you decide, and then you execute. I think we kind of know that's not really how things are. I mean, what's the difference between the decision and the execution? And why are we separating perception from action? We only act on what we perceive. The reason why Koeman, in the 92 Barcelona team, could perceive Stoichkov 65 meters away, running off the centre back, is because he can kick the ball 65 meters. He has that action capability. If the ball goes to another defender, Stoichkov never runs off the defender because he knows that player doesn't have the action capabilities. Perception and action are always tightly coupled. So a lot of these have been criticized for automizing movements, and we've seen this in coach education. Now the thing is, it's very important that these ideas were very much, let's say, pushed motor learning forward. It's easy to criticize them. But even Schmidt, one of the main people behind this in 1982, said, we need to move this on to a more ecological approach that brings in using ideas of Turvey and Gibson and Kelso, that we need to bring in the idea of culture and context and the actual in our movement and how that influences our movement. So even the people, one of the main guys behind these ideas has suggested we move on. So it's not, they really pushed skill acquisition forward, but it needed to be moved on because it really started downplaying the influence. And this is what Schmidt argued in 1982, that the typical these linear approaches downplay the influence of task and environment in shaping skill behavior. So, Carl Newell in 1986 proposed a more dynamic and non-linear. This is very central to the way I think we have to go. That skill learning and performance is a continuous adaptive process shaped by various factors, which we call constraints, over different timescales. Now, individual, task, environmental constraints. So I'll just give you a simple example how, let's take environmental constraints, because often they've been ignored in how they influence skill. I don't know if anybody heard of Pavel Datsyuk, ice hockey player, the Magic Man, yeah? So I was lucky to do a research paper on him, and he took part. He gave us about 2 hours of his time to do a long interview about his childhood. Now, again, this is no cause effect, just so you know. There's no cause effect. This is what helped shape his skill. He turns up at the NAHL, nobody understands what he's doing. The commentators, a famous commentator says, what are these magic skills? What's he doing? We've never seen anything like this before. And he spoke to, and he said, when I was young, because of the socio-economic, so there you have the social and cultural values, the socio-economic situation. When growing up, if you broke your ice hockey stick, you could be waiting a month to get a new one. So he really just wanted to play ice hockey. So he devised a way of playing where he protected the stick and the puck. And he says, I never did a slap shot. And to this day, I can't do a slap shot, which is opening up because it would have put a stick at risk. What's really fascinating here is that I spoke at the World Ice Hockey Conference in Toronto a few years back, where I met one of his coaches. He said, Pavel used the least amount of sticks in the NHL because he still played the same way. It was almost like Lionel Messi on ice. And then if you go to a typical linear program designed for children playing ice hockey, they have this as an essential skill, slap shots. And they have, by the age of 8, you should be able to do this. By the age of 9, this. By the age of 10, this. But Pavel Datsyuk couldn't do a slap shot. And he says a wonderful thing in the interview. We were just like, as kids, when we went out onto the ice, we were just like the Brazilians playing with ginga, sway. The great Brazilian team of the 58, 62, 70, and even 82, playing with ginga, sway, samba, capoeira, playing with resonating their own culture. So there we have an example of how, not cause effect, an example of how socio-economic, socio-cultural, environmental constraints can shape skill learning. Okay? So it's the interaction of these three. They're very non-linear. I mean, fatigue can happen quickly in a game. Motivation changes very quickly. Growth happens over different time periods. It's so individually. These are also individual constraints. They change the relationship between the individual environment. So the definition of skill that we work from, skill and performance is an ongoing functional fit between an individual and environment over time. It is not something that is in your brain, that you just take out from a library and go, and your brain tells your body to do it just this way and that's it. No, it's an ongoing, you don't own the skill. It's an ongoing interaction. Climbing a stairs at 5, climbing a stairs at 15, climbing a stairs at 30, climbing a stairs at 50, and at 80. You climb the stairs, but you adapt. You don't do it the same way. You adapt the skill. So it's an ongoing functional fit. So how can we design training environments so that young players can explore their functional fit? How do we promote agency? And how does a coach design practices? How long do I have left?
You have 15 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. These are the 3 principles of nonlinear pedagogy that we use in our courses at Norwegian School of Sports Sciences to also for coaches to explore. So we encourage coaches to use these principles to explore in their practice how to use it. So representative learning design, we can only act meaningfully if we have information that is meaningful. So information in your practice, it's not all the information, but it should be representative of information that athletes will act on in their sport. This brilliant idea of repetition without repetition, actually, it's from Nikolai Bernstein, a Russian scientist who actually in the 20s and 30s proposed these ideas, but it wasn't translated into English in 1967. And so the idea that, and this captures a role of, remember, traditional linear approaches had a very negative view of variability, where repetition without repetition is repetition with variation. Instead of repetition after repetition, it's repetition without repetition. And the view of probably enhancing variability. How much, of course, depends on the individual athlete, but we use variability. And learning is not the process of repeating a solution, it is repeating the process of finding a solution. And constraints manipulation. So if you're manipulating the environment, if you're changing the task in some way, putting in a rule, changing the amount of players or the size, just make sure it's still driven by information. And this is the observation. This is where observation comes in. Are the athletes or players, if it's football, still acting on representative information and acting in representative ways as they would in the game? So, James Vaughan and I devised these two. So this is just for football, but it's actually been transferred now to tennis, volleyball, similar ideas. The foundation for task design, I mean. So to capture the main principles of nonlinear pedagogy, so very simple, the foundation for task design, ball, opponent or opponents, which immediately means teammates. Direction, we're going somewhere. Consequence, we lose the ball, the opponents can go somewhere. And representative information. And then the idea of shaping skilled intentions. Now, we're proposing that it's not about actions, it's about intentions. You're working with young players' intentions because we're trying to promote agency here. So, in possession, when we have the ball, we act individually and collectively to play through, around, or over the opposition. We just juggle these intentions. They're constantly, they're dynamic. If you show the opportunity that you're going to play through the opposition, they might close, which might invite the opportunity for you to adapt and play around. And then when the opponents have the ball, we minimize opportunities individually and collectively for the opponents to play through, around, and over us. So this is the coach's compass for planning, observing, and reflection. And shaping skilled intentions, that's the player's compass. So I'm going to run you through, finish off with an actual real-life case study. So 2 years ago, I was in Bucharest. I was speaking at a conference, and they asked would I come out to Stau Bucharest Academy and work and do a session for, I'm sure you've all been at these places where a coach turns up and does a session. Now the thing is that I don't particularly like doing these blind sessions, because usually it's, you know, you turn up and if I have everything pre-prepared, right, it's theatre. It's nothing more than theatre if you don't start developing some sort of relationship with these kids and start starting with them. Often these, when you have these conferences, somebody goes in, does a session, and it's just like, everything is just prescribed and predetermined. So what I did is that I've never seen them play. So I'm prepared, not just planned. It's easy to plan, but be prepared. So I had some loose session designs that were very open. And that observation is key, because I wanted to develop my knowledge of the culture and the context and the environment. And I wanted to find out what I needed to amplify and dampen. So we decided, there were 16 of them. I asked them, can you break up into 2 teams, because we had 2 goalkeepers, and just play a game for 15 minutes. Limited time to watch them, but we did this. I did this. So I watched, observed, and then after 15 minutes, what was a key observation for me was a specific sociocultural constraint, and that was when building up play, especially from the goalkeeper, it did not matter what the opposition team did with pressing. It didn't matter if they press at 1, 2, 3, 4. They always played the same patterns. So what did that tell you? Tell you to come from a culture of top-down coaching of predetermined passing patterns. And they were not paying attention at all to what the opposition were doing, how they were pressed. They weren't perceiving the opportunities, or as we call them, the affordances for action in the environment. They could have played, instead of playing to the right back, oh, look, we have 2 midfielders there. Just give it to them higher up the pitch. No, we have to play this way, because they weren't paying attention. There was very little variation in what they were doing. So just broke it down simple. I introduced I use these very simple small-sided game. And this is just a 3v3 game. I tried to keep, they're small goals, I tried to keep them together. And there you have a target player, and if you want, you can play through or over to the target player, get the ball back and score. Otherwise, you don't have to play to the target player. And then on the other design, you see there's goalkeeper, so it was just about playing back to the keeper and getting the keeper to be involved in play, maybe playing over or playing through or around. So I just introduced the idea of through, round and over. Tried to manipulate it by, even in the small-sided games, by just saying experiment. What happens when you press high? Oh, well, they just kick over. Okay, cool. What happens if you're low? What happens if you're too compact? So we just worked with these ideas, okay? And the opportunities to play through, round and over, or minimize opportunities to play through, round and over. And then we went back out, we played an 8v8 game, but I coached one team. I deliberately coached one team, because I wanted to see if the other team were paying attention to the information, knowledge of. I wanted to have their knowledge of. So we decided that we would not press high, we'd have a middle press, we would prioritize them not playing through us. We are to stop them playing through us, minimize around, and the goalkeeper takes care of the over. Now, that is telling them what to do, but not how. They still have to self-organize this. So we started this, and the idea is you press when you feel you win the ball. And they really, because the opposition did not adapt to this at all. So they took over the game playing this way. They killed the through, minimized the around, and the keeper had the over. Then I stopped the game after 10 minutes, went to the other team, and I said, okay, what's going on? And the goalkeeper said, they're playing mid-block. They're not pressing as high. But we're building up with 4 players against nobody. So we have 4v0. And it was so funny because they weren't paying attention to that. So, okay, what are you going to... So they devised their own strategy. We're going to overload the middle to drag them in even more. and then we're going to attack around. So getting them to pay attention to what's the opposition has given you the information. Getting them to do this. And another sociocultural constraint came out of this, which is really interesting, was that this idea of, I noticed that when the the opportunity to play over, maybe to a centre forward or an attacker that was free, they didn't take it. And then one player said to me, no long ball. We're not allowed to play long ball. I'm like, what? So already the coaching culture was limiting their perception of the environment, because the coach was forcing a type of game model, knowledge about rules that you don't play long ball. But hang on a minute, we've a player free. If I just give to him, he could score. No, we don't play. So, and then the goalkeeper, the same thing. I said to him, why didn't you play that long diagonal there when this guy is free over there? And he goes, oh, but we're not allowed to do this. The other thing is, what's interesting, do you think the goalkeeper could kick the ball more than 25 meters? No. Why? Because he was never given the opportunity to do it. He never was allowed to explore the opportunity to play long diagonal, medium long passes to the middle, or short passes. He only played short all the time. So already, the predetermined passing patterns, a culture where they were doing possession training, where they would have just a game of 6v6 in an area, keep possession. There's no consequence, because when you lose the ball, the opponents can't do anything. So you can just go, whatever, maybe we'll win the ball back. And then the idea of no long ball. So I developed my knowledge of their coaching culture to work with this group over time, as opposed to just coming in and going, right, we're doing this session. So that's kind of a story of these ideas in action. And again, this places the learners in the central. This is their sport. It's not my sport. My session and my design and my coaching started with them. But it takes observation. And one thing I'll say for any working coach education, please, 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 please emphasize observation for your coaches. I don't ever see it on any coach education courses. Practice observation. What's happening in front of them. Because the first feedback comes from your session design to the players. And how they act on that is how you coach. So, rounding it off. Sport is for children, not the other way around. Children are not for sport. Invest where coaching and learning and performance take place, out in the practice. Challenge culturally resilient beliefs. Very, very important for administrators and policymakers and stakeholders. Try and promote agency in practice. See skill as an ongoing functional fit between individual environment over time, because the individual constraints and the environmental constraints constantly evolve and change. It is so complex and non-linear. Broaden your ways of knowing. It's not just knowledge about. Invite players and coaches to develop their knowledge of. It's not about knowing more, it's about knowing better. I'm going to finish with this. This is from, it is especially important to be very careful and tread carefully. It comes down to policies and trends in sports education and clubs that are all, after all, owned by local community and cornerstone of our lives. This is from Dadi, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago. And this word tread says me, because it's a great poem again. We're back to the start with William Butler Yeats. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. Tread softly as a coach, as a policy maker, as an administrator, whatever you're working in, because you tread on their dreams. Thank you.
Við höfum tíma fyrir svona 1 til 2 spurningar áður en við förum í hádegismat. Þannig að bara réttu fang og kynnið ykkur. Marta mun koma mæknum til ykkar. Einhverjum spurningum? Allt skýrt. Peter?
Thanks for the presentation. There's
evidence from Belgium, the work of Helsen and colleagues, that people who get to the higher level teams have done more training when they're younger than people who didn't. There's evidence from the United Kingdom, Ford, Williams, of exactly the same
I know
thing.
Mark's work,
Could you give me an example of evidence to the contrary that they do exactly
the thing is,
the
all
same
the evidence is,
training?
that's the idea, is that talent is a graveyard of evidence. Nobody sees the dead bodies. The evidence is on survivors. We need to work also with those that didn't make the system, because I've worked in sport for many years, and many of you have. There are young people that just train as much as other people that made it, and they don't get anywhere. So to assume it's all about, and reducing it to hours, I think is a very reductionist way of looking at it. But I think this is the problem, that we're developing our research on expertise only, our assumption of expertise. There's so many other factors, and like the idea, the environmental constraints that play a role as well. So I know that I know the work of Gulic as well, Arne Gulic, but also there is evidence of more play in the younger ages, as opposed to more top-down opposed organized training in the before puberty. There's evidence of that as well. But again, even though it really supports how I think, I don't think that is the exact way to do it either, because we can't copy paste. You can't go and play like Pavel because he's adapting to his environment. So I just think the evidence we have is the graveyard of evidence. Nobody sees the dead bodies. Maybe we need to have far bigger research around those that didn't get anywhere.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Einu viðbót. Okay. Já, Eygló.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Eygló.
Hi.
Just to add on this, could it be that maybe that's the normal way, that everyone is training the same, and the talented ones are the one that survived it, instead of seeing a bunch of different styles and knowing what works, because usually everyone goes through the same system.
This is a problem with the homogenized and standardized systems we're going to. We're narrowing the system so much now that you actually, I don't know if you saw a recent interview with Paul Scholes and Nikki Butt. They both said, we wouldn't survive 1 minute in the system now. We wouldn't be noticed or picked up. And I think Pavel Datsyuk said the same as well in an interview. And we're narrowing it and narrowing it and narrowing it, because we want to measure it. It's much easier if we can. And we can tick those boxes then. So the thing is that I think we need, as we have a saying, as many as possible, as long as possible, as good as possible. I think we need to try and keep the systems open. The illusion of professionalization narrows the system deliberately, and it's not child-centered. Then that's my opinion on this. I hope that in some way.
Yeah, I agree. I come from swimming, so
Yeah.
it's a really.
Yeah, we're narrowing it. And then, as I said, to get some eggs, put some eggs in the bag, throw the bag at the wall, take out the egg that doesn't break. The system works. And there's your evidence. Let's write papers about it.
Ok, þá það hádegismatur og við byrjum aftur 20 mínútur yfir 12.
Thank you.